Hey there, Sports History fan. Arnie Chapman here from the Sports History Network. Now, before you jump into this episode, I wanted to share with you an exciting giveaway we have going on with Home Field Apparel. We have a digital $50 gift card to homefieldapparel.com for one lucky fan of the Sports History Network. All you got to do is head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways to sign up. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways.
Hello, this is Ross Bliley from the podcast Pigskin Tales. This podcast is sponsored by Sterling Soap Company. With products sold throughout 41 locations around the globe, Sterling Soap Company has a unique assortment of products to choose from for your loved one for the holidays. Handmade artisan soaps created by Roderick and Amanda Lovin since 2012, these products are affordable and provide great value. Act now and save on your shipping costs. If you purchase $75 or more, your shipping cost is free in the United States. Shop now online at sterlingsoap.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, Old Sports, and welcome to the Hello Old Sports podcast on the Sports History Network. I'm Dan Newman by my brother and co-host Andrew Newman. Andrew, how are you doing tonight?
I'm as well as can be expected, Dan. It's 3 days after the Super Bowl, and that was obviously a devastating blow for decent people everywhere. So I'm going to take a while for us to sort of band together about it, but I'm day by day. You know what I mean?
It's funny because you reminded me that one of the next things we have to record is our little postscript, because we did an episode at the beginning of football season about all of the teams that had tried to three-peat in the Super Bowl era and did not, and then said that we would do an episode talking about how the Chiefs did, and we've definitely got some material to work with on that one.
I'm not talking about that.
I'll do a solo postscript. I'll write out a script.
Yes, that works.
But tonight we got something a little more fun and a little more New York centric.
Yes, let's get to some things that really matter.
So the genesis, we're going to go through, and I don't know how many of these we're going to make it through. This will not be a one-part episode. This will probably be at least 2 parts, maybe more. We haven't really figured out how long it's going to take, but we're going to go through and starting with 1 and ending with 99, or I guess starting with 1 and ending with 0. I do have a 0, but I thought maybe we would end with that rather than start.
Yeah.
We're going to.
I didn't come up with a 0. I tried to do it quickly this afternoon. Then I was like, are we going to do 0 and 00, which I think is only a basketball invention. I don't think any other sports were 0. So that was going to be my ask, was let's pull zeros off to the end after 99. So
I agree, but we're going to start with 1 and we're going to go to 99 and name a New York athlete for each number from 1 to 0. Andrew kind of gave me the idea for this over the summer when he was out at like a state fair type thing in New England.
Yeah, so it was in September, but close enough. So there's a thing, and depending on what part of the country you're from, you might be familiar with this. Instead of individual state fairs, and I didn't know this till I started dating a girl from Connecticut and then subsequently moved to Connecticut. Instead of individual state fairs in Connecticut, they have a thing called the Big E, which is short for Big Exposition. And every state has their own state house, and they have different not restaurants, but like food stalls and breweries send their stalls, and then there's carnival rides and stuff like that. And it's really, really cool. But a lot of little shops, and one of them we saw a big blanket quilt kind of thing for the Boston sports teams, and it was every number, maybe 1 to 99. I don't remember if they had 0. Well, they probably did for Boston have 0, or at least 00. And they had a player for each jersey number across the teams, mostly the big 4 current teams, but I think there might have been a Boston Brave or 2 on there, and I believe there was at least one BU hockey player maybe on there, or Boston. Doug Flutie was on there. Boston College. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, but Flutie was 22. I'm looking at it now. Yeah, it wasn't all pro.
Yeah.
They did do one college guy with Flutie.
So we thought, hey, we should do this for New York. Now, New York is obviously a bigger challenge because you're really looking at, and by the way, I did not do any college players for New York.
Me neither.
Because then also you'd be like, well, what is it just St. John's? Do you count a school like Seton Hall? So I didn't do any college players. But with New York, you're really looking at 11 teams because there's 9 current teams: the Giants, the Jets, the Yankees, the Mets, the Knicks, the Nets, and the Devils, Islanders, and Rangers. And I noticed some people who might not be from the area, they go, wait a minute, the Devils don't play in New York. The Devils play in New Jersey, or the Nets didn't play in New York until, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever. Those 9 teams are the New York sports teams. Everybody considers those the New York sports teams. Some are more popular than others, but those are all the NY metro area teams. And then you also have to factor in the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Baseball Giants. Now, you're only looking at about a quarter century with them because the Yankees started wearing uniform numbers in 1929. Other teams followed suit throughout the 30s, really. Both of those teams were gone by 1957. So if they seem, especially the Giants, underrepresented on here, it's because it really wasn't a long time they were around. Like the Giants, a lot of the Giants' best players didn't wear uniform numbers because they were, they were gone. And that's sort of a good ground rule to lay is their career in New York is what we're counting. So, a guy like Willie Mays, we're not counting his San Francisco Giants career. If a guy wore number 17 and had a great career with the Chicago Blackhawks and then wore it for a year with the Rangers, we're not counting that, or at least I wasn't. So it's basically them wearing that number in New York is what we're looking at here.
And that's exactly right. And so, and I think, I don't know, not to spoil things, but as we go along, I think there might be another reason too why some New York Giants got screwed. I think there was a little bit of bad luck at play as well, but we can get to that in a little bit.
Yeah, and what I did is I wrote them all down. I went up to 60 at the moment. I don't imagine we'll get close to 60 tonight. Today, maybe 50. Anyone where there was like close, where some guys got edged out, I kind of wrote in parentheses, and I would assume things will come up. But that's sort of where we are, and you'll go through a run where it's really strong ones, and guys are edging out other Hall of Famers, and then you'll go to the next number, and it's like, ooh, not much there. And just, to my prep, I printed out these sheets here of every team's retired numbers. Now, they don't have to be retired to be factored in on this, but it was, a good jumping off point. And what I did is I had to print out the Dodgers and Giants ones and then cross off all the ones that don't count because they were after they moved westward.
Cross him off then.
Cross him. The funniest line for a guy who's only got one line and one scene in a movie. This guy here is dead. As will be most of the guys we talk about here today. The other thing I would mention is I did not on any level include non-players. So I did not include non-players, and if they were a player and a manager, perhaps got fired 5 or 6 times, I did not count anything that was not a player. So I have, by the face you made, I'm guessing you did not do that.
I did not include managers. I did include managers, yes.
All right. Well, I have a feeling really it's baseball.
Yeah.
No other sport is a thing, but we'll cover those as we go. So I guess enough stalling. Let's do one for the homeland. Should we get this started?
Yeah, and I guess we can kind of just go back and forth a little bit or whatever, but we'll start at the beginning, naturally, with number 1. And where did you go for number 1?
I went with Eddie Giacomin, the
great Rangers star.
Yeah, one of probably the best Rangers goalie up until Mike Richter, Henrik Lundqvist. I think Lundqvist pretty universally gets the nod over him. Richter might be a little more of a debate. Obviously, I'm not the biggest hockey expert. I know he was a ranking I looked at here had him as by the way, the New York Post and the New York Times both did versions of these that I used as reference that were pretty good. Although the link I just pulled up is okay. It went to a non-New York one. It was like number 1, Ozzie Smith. I was like, well, I'm on the wrong thing. So I went with Giacomin. The thing I saw had him ranked as like the 6th best New York Ranger of all time. The next guy on the list I was considering was Pee Wee Reese. I just thought that Giacomin's place within the firmament of the New York Rangers and his probably overall standing is better than Reese's with the Brooklyn Dodgers.
So I went Reese.
Okay.
I looked at Giacomin. I also looked at Billy Martin because we differed there, and that I countered his counted both his managerial career, such as it was, and we did an episode on Billy Martin in the Yankee years, so check that out. But I did go with Pee Wee Reese, second all time in WAR in Brooklyn Dodgers, actually not in Brooklyn Dodgers, in all Dodgers team history. He is the only guy who played in all of the Yankee-Dodger Subway Series in the 40s and 50s, starting with 41 and going to 1956. Hall of Famer, 10-time All-Star. He was on the team, like I said, when they won the 55 World Series. He did go to the team. He played one season in L.A., but it was really only about a third of a season. He played 59 games in 1958 for the L.A. Dodgers. Everybody's talked about the role that he played in easing Jackie Robinson's transition to the major leagues. Obviously, we're talking about two very different types of careers. I don't know. I feel like we're probably starting off with a tough one right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I looked. Reese is a 10-time All-Star. Giacomin is a 6-time All-Star. At first, I was like, well, yeah, but you got to remember how few goalies would have made the All-Star team back then. But at the same time, you got to look at how many teams were in the league.
That's a fair point.
If they each carried 2 goalies, that's 2/3 of the starting goalies for most of his career. I would go with Reese. I guess I would be inclined to go with Reese. I think I also was trying to not overcorrect against hockey in a lot of cases. So I think, in that instance, you seem more firmly with Reese than I do with Giacomin. So
okay. All right. Well, so we'll go with Pee Wee Reese at number 1. Go ahead.
Real quick, before we get into this next little run here, anybody who wants to accuse us of any kind of anti-Yankee bias, or I mean, really good luck with that. Anybody who wants to say like, oh, you got, okay, most of these are not debatable. The next bunch of these are pretty undebatable, but I'll let you go ahead with number 2.
So I went Derek Jeter for number 2. I think it's pretty much a no-brainer. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. He is 3,000 hits, World Series MVP, 5-time world champion, captain of the Yankees. I couldn't really go. He's probably in the, I know some people claim him to be a little bit overrated. I had a hard time. It's probably, I don't know, best 5, 6 shortstops of all time. Guy who really more than anyone defined an era for the Yankees. I really couldn't see where else you could go. The only other place that I looked that I thought was maybe worth considering was Brian Leach. Long time, played with the Rangers for a very long time. He was with the Rangers from 87 all the way until 2004. He played his whole NHL career other than the very last season. He was with Boston for about 60 games. Oh, no, sorry, Toronto for about 15 the year before that. So virtually his entire career with the Rangers. Hall of Famer, MVP of their Stanley Cup championship win in 1994. So I understand the appeal of Brian Leach, but you just can't get past Derek Jeter.
No. I mean, Brian Leach was a fine player, but Derek Jeter. We can have lots of discussions about the proper rating of Derek Jeter, both as an all-time Yankee, an all-time player, any of that. Even the most pessimistic reading of Derek Jeter is going to put him above Brian Leach here. So I don't think there's much debate.
And then the only other one that I thought maybe was worth considering, and you maybe might, you probably wouldn't have thought of this because of your aversion to managers, but I did sort of flag Leo DeRocher also, who wore number 2 as manager of both the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants in 3 World Series. So just another one to throw out there, but not over.
By the way,
Jeter.
I just didn't think we were doing managers. I don't have an aversion to managers. I didn't think we were including managers because I didn't think it was fair because you could only add managers in one sport. That's kind or coaches. So that's kind of why I didn't do it. But
okay, well, we'll talk about it as they come up. But I think we're pretty.
Well, that makes one of these real hard, and we'll get to that either this episode or next episode. But we can get to that later.
Okay.
All right. Number 3 is Babe Ruth. I'm sorry, it's not close in any regard. The Times article didn't even list an honorable mention here. You may have other people. None of them are in the debate for this. Babe Ruth is certainly the most famous, best. It's just there's no reason to waste. It's Babe Ruth is number 3.
It is, and I didn't even see anybody that I really thought was worth considering otherwise. I mean, I don't know. I'm joking here, but the only other guy who comes immediately to mind is John Starks. So,
Harry Howell is apparently a retired number for the Rangers at number 3. But
and he was one of their early guys, right?
I would imagine.
Yeah, it's Babe Ruth.
All right, number 4. This one was loaded.
So when you say it's loaded, obviously you're mentioning not just the guy who I picked, who is Lou Gehrig, but you also got Duke Snider during his Dodgers days, and I guess briefly back with the Mets as well. Who did you? I went with Gehrig, but and the other one I guess would be that I thought to mention was Mel Ott, great outfielder for the Giants of the 30s, won a championship in 33. So, and I do think it's going to be a theme that we're not going to have a lot of New York Giants for some of the reasons that you mentioned, but I feel like it's got to be Gehrig, right?
It is Gehrig, but and it's Gehrig, and it's not particularly close. But Mel Ott is a great player. He's the best player of the Giants between the early 20s teams and the early 50s teams. Well, him and Hubble, but the other guys you mentioned, Duke Snider. You also have Scott Stevens, who was a huge part of those Rangers teams that won those cups. He was, I don't know if he was the captain on those teams or what he was, but he was a Devil from 1991 all the way to 2004. So he would have won 3 Stanley Cups with the Devils.
Yeah.
So it's Scott Stevens, and then also Tuffy Lemans from the New York Football. So all of those guys have their jerseys retired, by the way. So it's Gehrig. Gehrig is another one of these guys who probably is underrated at this point because people think of the speech and the streak, and then you look at the years of the RBIs he hit and the home runs and the championship. So it's Gehrig by a fairly wide margin, but there's a lot of other guys who would be on this list above a ton of guys.
Agreed.
Wore the wrong number.
Number 5?
Number 5 is DiMaggio. again, you start to get to like, oh, is there somebody else? Am I maybe overdoing the Yankees? The closest guy really was Dennis Potvin from the Islanders dynasty teams, who was obviously a really good player, was probably the second best player on those Islander teams that won 4 straight cups behind Mike Bossy. You also have David Wright, who really doesn't, I mean, meant a lot to Mets fans, but we're talking about Joe DiMaggio here. And then Jason Kidd, who had some really nice years with the Nets, but again, there's really no gap, or there's quite a bit of separation between Joe DiMaggio and the rest of those guys without taking anything away from a guy like Dennis Potvin.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to ignore what Joe DiMaggio meant to New York, to the Yankees, to baseball, to sort of the national sports landscape. So, yeah, I think we're in agreement. Number 5, Joe DiMaggio.
Mm-hmm. Number 6.
So I went with Joe Torre. Wore number 6 as a manager, 4 titles, 6 World Series appearance, Hall of Famer as a manager, number retired. You know, it's funny because you got all these numbers like, you know, you could have a pretty good top 5 if you just took the Yankees never existed. You could still have Potvin and Snyder and you know, I guess 3 might be a little tougher, but then you could have Brian Leach at number 2. I'm curious if you didn't go Torre. I'm curious where you did go.
Carl Furillo.
Carl Furillo, left fielder of the Brooklyn Dodgers in the 50s. Won a batting title in the early 50s. I forget which year. Known as the Reading Rifle because he was from Reading, Pennsylvania, and he had an incredible arm. I believe he was mostly and I'm embarrassed that I don't know.
Mostly a right fielder, it looks like.
Mostly a right fielder, yeah. So, I mean, I'll leave it to you. Would have been
53, I'm guessing. He hit 344 in 53, so...
Yeah, and I think that was a batting title that year. I'm not 100%.
Yeah, well, if you said he won a batting title, that would have been the year. Yeah, no, look, if we're counting managers, then absolutely it's Joe Torre. Like, I'm not going to argue with you that it's Joe Torre. If we weren't including managers, then Furillo was who I came up with. But in this instance, if Joe Torre can be considered, the guy's won 4 World Series as a Yankee manager. He's up there in the pantheon with Huggins and McCarthy and Stengel. Really, it's the 4 of them in that group. So, absolutely, he would be on there.
Yeah, let's go with Torre.
All right. Well, we're going to continue on with this here as number 7, right? And that's Mickey Mantle. 2 through 7 have all been Yankees, but again, I dare you to argue. I mean, what are you going to say? This is Mickey Mantle. It's one of the all-time great baseball players, certainly arguably in stature in New York, like long term, probably only ever behind Ruth in terms of what they meant to a generation of people in New York. Now, obviously, nobody that I've talked to is really alive during Ruth's tenure, and Mantle is that gets longer and longer ago every day. And Jeter is, probably close in terms of stature as a New York Yankee, but not in terms of the same caliber of player at any point. Mantle won multiple MVPs. But yeah, I mean, Mel Hein was a really nice player. He was a center for the Giants in the 20s and 30s and won an MVP as a center, and Rod Gilbert, but like, come on, it's pretty easily Mickey Mantle, right?
It is. Mel Hein was the other one I thought of. 2 world championships with the football Giants. Linebacker and center, but better known historically as a center. Only offensive lineman ever to win the MVP award in the National Football League. But
far,
you can't even get a running back to win it this year, let alone a center or a guard. So I would not hold my breath. But yeah, it's got to be Mantle. It's got to be Mantle.
All right. Well, as we continue on our tour of the single digits here, number 8.
So number 8 in my mind was a war might be a little bit of an overstatement, was a battle between two all-time great Yankee catchers, and that's Yogi Berra and Bill Dickey. And it's funny actually because I'm looking at this list here. If you had to pick a person for third, it would be another New York catcher, Gary Carter. But it's really between Dickey and Berra, both of whom played their entire careers with the Yankees. Well, technically, Berra played a handful of games for the Mets in '65, but for all intents and purposes, both career Yankees. I go Berra because Berra, he's the winningest. I think he's second only to Bill Russell in championships won by an athlete, a player in the Big Four, 10-time World Series, 3-time MVP. Now, there wasn't an MVP for the very beginning of Dickey's career. But I guess it kind of even was. I don't know. There might have been some weird sort of quirks to it, but Berra, one of the best offensive catchers of all time. He's got a WAR of 59.6 in his years with the Yankees, and my guess is Dickey's, well, impressive is probably not quite as good. It's damn close. It's 56.4, and Dickey missed 2 years to military service, although admittedly 2 years at the end of his career. Interestingly enough,
Berra technically missed 2 years at the beginning of his career.
Yeah, but he was never in the majors, so it's hard to say whether he would have made it to the major. But it's a fair point. Interestingly enough, they actually two things interesting. First of all, Berra actually didn't start his career wearing number 8. He wore number 38 and number 35, and then finally he wore 8 sort of, I think it kind of almost like in honor of Dickey when Dickey started training him. Casey Stengel brought Bill Dickey in to train Yogi Berra in how to catch in 1949 when Stengel became the manager. It's a lot closer between the two than I thought, but maybe I'm being a little bit shallow with this, but Yogi Berra is just such an iconic baseball player. And then if we're counting managing, we should maybe also factor in that he wore number 8 as the manager of both the Yankees and the Mets, and brought each team to a World Series. So a guy who was on the New York baseball landscape wearing number 8 for a very, 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 very long time, even longer than Dickey. So it's close, but I got to go Dickey. I'm sorry, I got to go Berra. Yeah.
Yeah, Berra won 3 MVPs too. I mean, Berra was the best player on that team in the early part of the 50s. So I think it's definitely Berra.
Yeah, we've talked about that before, about how the sort of conception is that it went from Mantle to or from DiMaggio right to Mantle, but there was a year in the early and mid 50s as DiMaggio was winding down and Mantle was wrapping up. Berra was the leader of the team offensively, no question about it. Closest Dickey ever came to an MVP was in 1938, where he finished behind Jimmy Fox of the Boston Red Sox. He was second overall. So, yeah, Berra has the better career.
All right. Number 9, I'm going to break this up a little bit here and go with Clark Gillies, the defenseman on those really good Islanders teams. He was on the team that won the 4 straight cups. I'm sorry, he wasn't a defenseman. He was a winger. Won the 4 straight cups. He was a multiple-time All-Star. He played for, I want to say he was an Islander for about 12 years. He came up with the Islanders in 74, 75, which was probably, I think, maybe their second season. 58 seasons, yeah, I want to say this was the Islanders' second season in the league. He was there all the way through the 85, 86 season, was on the 4 straight cup teams and the 15 that got there. So he won 4 cups with them. First team All-Star 2 times, or first All-Star team. I think that means like the all-pro team basically for the NHL, multiple-time All-Star. Maris was not there super long. I know Greg Nettles had a nice career with the Yankees, but in this instance, I got to go with Gillies.
Yeah, it's interesting that even when we're not going with a Yankee, we're that's a number that's retired by the Yankees.
Yeah, you're right, and arguably could be twice, but
yeah, they didn't retire it for Maris until after Nettles had left for that reason.
Who did you go with, Gillies as well? Or?
I went with Clark Gillies. As I was doing this, being not a huge hockey fan and not a big expert on the history of hockey, I had to there's one that I don't know if we're going to get to tonight, but there's one that I had to kind of remind myself, and with all of these, but you had to kind of remind yourself that the Islanders did win 4 straight Stanley Cups in the early 1980s, and were a well-loved team on Long Island during those years. So I had to kind of keep reminding myself not to forget about those 4 in a row Islander teams.
Yeah, and I was kind of going because I didn't want to just put Islanders on there because again, I'm like you with hockey, but I like the Islanders. I didn't want to be like, I have more Islanders on here than Rangers or whatever, because the Rangers have obviously been around a lot longer. But when you're talking about that specific run of Islander teams and those really, and I by the way, I'm well represented with the Devils here as well, lest anybody think I'm overlooking that. As we break into double digits here, we go up to another one, a number 10. Would you like to give us your thoughts on this?
This might have been the hardest one I did of all 100. I was back and forth on this one. There's a couple coming up that were really tough for me. But this might have been one of the hardest. My original thought was Eli Manning, no brainer. 2-time Super Bowl champion, 2-time Super Bowl MVP, twice led the Giants over the vaunted, and in at least one particular instance, New England Patriots. But Clyde Frazier was in my head. I don't know. I mean, stats maybe, but I mean, he was probably the best player consistently on those 70s Knicks team. I know Willis Reed won an MVP in 70, but Willis is basically, and we did an episode a few years back on the 73 Knicks. By 72, 73, Willis is coming to an end of his career, and Clyde Frazier is still very, very much in his prime. So I really, really struggled with this one. I did eventually write one of them down, but I wanted to hear your thoughts because I could be easily persuaded either way.
I didn't struggle with this as much as you did. I think it's pretty clearly Clyde Frazier.
Really?
And me as Giants are my favorite team in all of sports. Super Bowl 42 is one of the best days of my life still to this moment. One of them is the best player in their franchise's history. And that to me is Clyde. Because again, you got to remember, this is not just like what would most fans walking around the street today recognize. And we're going to talk about that when we get to the next number. That's not to take anything away from Eli Manning, but Clyde Frazier is the best Knick in franchise history. He won 2 championships as well. I just felt like Clyde at his peak, standing within the franchise. I went with Clyde.
Okay. I am not inclined to argue that because I was really struggling. I think I kind of wanted to end up on Clyde Frazier, even if I thought it might go with Eli. So that works for me. Clyde Frazier, our first Knick, our first basketball player. And it was either going to be our first. Go ahead.
As I look at every number in the teens, I would have gone with Eli over them. If he any number in the teens, I would have gone with Eli. Namath might be a tough one when we get. Yeah, I think so. So it's a tough draw. I would have had him over Gillies. There's a few other ones, but I couldn't put him over Clyde.
All right, well, let's get to number 11 because this one's interesting to me.
So almost everywhere you look, they have either Mark Messier or Phil Simms.
Okay.
I did not go with either of them.
Oh, really?
I went with Carl Hubble.
You did?
Carl Hubble pitched for 15 years with the New York Giants wearing number 11, probably not his first year or so because he came up in 28, but most of his career, starting in the early 30s, he won 2 MVPs in 1933 and 1936. He finished third in the MVP in 1937. He won in a 6-year period from 1933, 5-year period, 1933 to 1938. He won no fewer than 21 games each of those years. He pitched all the way until the outbreak of World War II. He was a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-time All-Star was Carl Hubble. He won a world championship in 1933. Pitching in an era that became a power era. It wasn't like you can look at, well, it was 1907 or whatever. Messier was only a Ranger for about 6-7 years. And I know 94 is legendary. And, I certainly will not protest too much if that's the case. And I understand Phil Simms and what he meant to the Giants. And certainly I feel bad having 2 in a row where I'm talking about Super Bowl winning Giants quarterbacks and putting somebody above them. But I also want to do right by every team in every era here.
Yeah, I mean, it's not Simms. I think it's not Simms. I have a hard time getting away from Messier just because of what he meant to a team that is one of the most storied seasons in the history of New York sports. I'm not a hockey expert, and I like to consider myself at least somewhat of a baseball history expert, but I have a hard time getting away from Messier here.
All right. I mean, again, we can go with that. He was a Ranger from, I guess, did he win? He was a Ranger 90, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97. And then he was back for a few. All right. Yeah. Messier is the answer. I just, I had a feeling I would end up off Messier or off Carl Hubble, but I wanted to put in the good word for him.
No, and I'm glad you did because we got 2 guys, Mel Ott and Carl Hubble, who are probably the two best pure New York Giants who actually wore numbers. Obviously, Christy Mathewson didn't wear a number, and some of the guys from the great New York Giants of the 19th century didn't wear numbers. But yeah, no, I'm glad you did because I was going to mention him. I wasn't going to push for him as hard as you did, but I was at least going to mention him. So the good one to bring up. All
right, number 12.
Number 12 is Namath. He's Joe Namath. He's a Hall of Famer, even if a potentially weak one. He did sort of like Messier lead the team into, obviously the biggest win by far in Jets history. There also didn't really seem to be a lot of competition here. I don't know if you had anyone else who you were looking to bring up. I mean, I know Dick Barnett has his number retired by the Knicks now at number 12, or maybe he doesn't even. He went in the Hall of. He does.
Yep. Every Knick retired number is a Hall of Famer.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
I wrote H's next to the guys who. I think he's the only other guy who's got his number retired. Besides Namath, I'm looking through the hockey right now. He's the only other New York guy who's got his number retired, who's got number 12 retired. And there's no credible argument to make of Dick Barnett over Joe Namath. So,
yeah. And the
Times article did not even list an honorable mention for this.
I know that Barnett just got into the Hall of Fame, but when was his number first retired? I'm curious now. Just give me a second to look that up. Oh, no, they retired it all the way back in 1990. So, okay, his number's been retired for a while, even if he's not just getting into the Hall of Fame now. So, all right, yeah. Barnett, agreed. Or, I'm sorry, God, Namath, agreed. So,
all right.
So far, we got I'm just looking at this now. We got a Jet, we got a Ranger, we got a Knick, we got an Islander, we got a Yankee, we got a Dodger. Obviously, it's mostly been Yankees, but we're spread it around a little bit so far, which is good.
All right, number 13. This gets tough depending on, like, you have to have a conversation about A-Rod, which I really don't feel like having a conversation about A-Rod. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And that's, I don't dislike Alex Rodriguez. Alex Rodriguez is a big part of why the Giants won, or why the Yankees won the World Series in 2009. And Alex Rodriguez had a lot of good years with the Yankees. I'm not an A-Rod hater in that regard. But, like, in the context of this conversation, it's like, was Alex Rodriguez, even just as a Yankee, did he have a better career than Don Maynard from the Jets? Yes. But it's like, you also have to, I don't know. It's like, it's almost forcing us into discuss, like, well, does the fact that a lot of people don't like him and think he cheated, like, we don't want to weigh that, but should we? I don't know. So let me know what you thought about this. I guess I'll say I wrote down Maynard, but as I'm talking here, I probably am leaning the other way on it.
Yeah, I went A-Rod. 2 MVPs. They don't win that World Series in 2009 were it not for him. So, yeah, it's A-Rod.
Mm.
I looked at Maynard just as, like, number 2, but to me, again, this is another one that maybe didn't feel particularly close to me. I went with Alex Rodriguez.
All right. Who'd you go with 14?
So I went Gil Hodges 14. Guy that we saw inducted into the Hall of Fame many years after his death a couple years back. 8-time All-Star with Brooklyn. Actually played a little bit with the Mets and then, managed the Miracle Mets. A guy who was somebody I was always kind of looking to get into I was rooting for him to get into the Hall of Fame posthumously, though it may have been. Somebody, just to kind of bring up one thing about him, somebody who people said if the Gold Glove had been around for his entire career, they think he won 3. He won 3 very late in his career in 57, 58, and 59, which I think were the first 3 years of the Gold Glove. People say had those been around, he probably would have won, 10 of them. So I went with him, and then also if we're counting managing the Miracle Mets, obviously pushes you over the hump a little bit. The Athletic article that I think you were looking at too. The only other guy they mentioned as a possible is Moose Skowron, who definitely not on that level. So to me, Gil Hodges.
Yep, it's Hodges. There's not a great. The only was 14 Y.A. Tittle.
Yeah, it was.
So, Y.A. Tittle was a Giant for 4 years and didn't win a championship. Now, he had 4 great years and came close to winning a championship 3 different times, but you can't go with him for that short a time frame. Then when you're in the Mets thing, it just makes it even more, but I don't even know who it's a blowout over. So you really, I guess Tittle. Yeah. 15 is Thurman Munson.
Yeah.
And I'll be what's that?
I did not have Thurman Munson.
Who did you have, Earl Monroe?
I had Earl of Pearl.
All right. So Munson, it's interesting because I've always kind of wondered, hey, is Munson one of these guys who is a little overrated because players, the fans of that era loved him. Munson is a guy who it's also obviously hard to, separate his career from the legacy of both him as the captain and this kind of stoic figure, and also the tragic circumstances surrounding his death in the middle of his playing career, or at least, he was 32, so he still had a number of years left to play. But he was an MVP in 1976. He finished in the top 10 in MVP. The 2 years surrounding that, 75 and 77, he finished in 7th. 3 Gold Gloves. He was Rookie of the Year in 1970 and kind of became associated with the Yankees' rise from the ashes. His first year, he only played in 26 games in 1969, but he's the full-time catcher by 1970. They're still bad. And by the time his career ends, obviously his career ended when his life ended, but they've won 2 world championships. It's the Steinbrenner era. They're back in the renovated Yankee Stadium. Earl Monroe had a better career than Thurman Munson. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of Earl Monroe's career was not with the Knicks.
It's funny because I remember all the way back 4 years ago now when we were doing our all-time starting fives, and I felt like we were kind of on other sides of this argument about Earl Monroe, because I had said that I thought that Earl Monroe's Knick career might be a little overrated, and you said, well, no, he played there for a really long time. But yeah, I mean, I think you convinced me again on Munson. Earl Monroe was only, and again, obviously when you're comparing guys in different sports, it's really hard, but Earl Monroe was only an all-star twice with the Knicks, where Thurman Munson was 7, I want to say. Basically, 7, yeah. Both won 2 titles. Munson was an MVP, like you said. It's different in different sports, but I think the combination of what they meant to the franchise and the fact that the careers in a lot of ways are similar as far as level of individual success, I can give in and I can go Munson.
And if it's close, do we not have to go with the guy who played his whole career with the team?
I can see that.
All right. Number 16 was a little tough.
This next one is really interesting to me. So
it's your turn.
I was back and forth, Whitey Ford and Frank Gifford.
Mm-hmm.
I actually ended up going Gifford.
Okay.
As he was the first marquee New York Giants star. And Whitey Ford is one of the great pitchers in in baseball history. He's definitely the best pitcher in Yankee history. But Gifford, he never won an MVP, but he played in what's that? He actually missed 61 because he had temporarily retired, but he played in 5 NFL championship games with the Giants. He was 4-time first team, 1-time second team All-Pro. Played the beginning end of his career as a halfback, a running back, and then after his 1-year temporary retirement, actually came back as a flanker back, more of a wide receiver, and had some really good years as a wide receiver as well. So, yeah, I think maybe because, and he was technically, I guess in 56, he was, and that was in 56, which was right before they started giving out the one official MVP award. He was the UPI MVP and then the NEA, and I don't know what that stands for, but he essentially did have an MVP career in 56. So, yeah, first marquee New York Giants star. When they point to the Giants of the 50s and early 60s kind of achieving parity in the public eye with the Yankees, Gifford is the one they point to as one of the first. So, yeah, I surprised myself by coming down with Frank Gifford.
Yeah, and I think you convinced me. I had written them both down, but would have probably leaned slightly towards Whitey Ford. But I think as you lay that out there, and Ford was the best pitcher on all those teams, but the reason for those teams' success was the hitting. Obviously Ford had won the Cy Young in 61 and was really good in the World Series. But yeah, I would tend to agree with you and go with Gifford. And just also he doesn't go on this list, but there are certain numbers he would have. Doc Gooden wore 16 too, and just obviously his career flamed. He wore 16 with the Mets. He was 11, I want to say, with the Yankees. But yeah, let's go with Gifford there.
I looked at 2 lists here. I think the same as you. There was a post, and then you said New York Times. I think it was actually The Athletic before it was.
Well, the link I got it from was the New York Times, but it's The Athletic.
One named Whitey Ford, one named Frank Gifford. So,
the post one is like the guy revisiting a list he made 10 years before that.
Yeah,
and Vaccaro's really good, but yeah. So I think each one is justified, but I think we're in the right place going with Gifford.
Number 17.
So 17, I went with Keith Hernandez.
Me too.
Yeah, that was his number with the Mets. He didn't wear it before that. Not that it would have mattered anyway, but one of the best players on the 86 Mets, associated very much with that team. He was the captain. Not even really anybody else springs to mind as a number 17, but even if Plexico Burress, but Keith Hernandez gets the nod over Plexico Burress there. So
but Keith Hernandez had great defense, and Plexico Burress needed a defense lawyer during their times with the team.
Yeah, look, he also caught the game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl. Let's not totally.
No, I don't.
And won them the NFC Championship game the week before that. But yes. So
by the same token, though, I think with Hernandez, just to sort of bolster the case, him coming to the team in '84 is widely seen as kind of the moment when they turned it around. So, so it's Keith Hernandez. And then just kind of to segue for number 18, we have a guy he once punched on picture day, I think. I went with Darryl Strawberry for number 18.
Yeah, and we mentioned Gooden before, and if that hadn't been such a loaded number, we'd be in a nice mid-'80s Mets run here. But, Darryl's the guy at 18. Obviously, much like Gooden, the career becomes a kind of thing of, well, what could have been if, but he still had a lot of really good years, and I'm pulling up his stats. Now, he had a lot of really good years with the Mets. He didn't wear 18 with the Yankees, did he? He wore 38, 39, something like that.
He wore 26 his first year, and then he wore 39 when they brought him back in 96 and all the way was to. I don't know why he didn't wear 18. I mean, I guess it was just always taken, but it wasn't. I mean, it was taken by guys who, like Mariano Duncan and, whoever else.
So he came up in 83. Strawberry did. He was the rookie of the year. Every other year, he was a Met through 1990. He was an all-star. 88, he finished second in MVP voting. 90, he finished third. 87, he was sixth. So 3 top 10 MVP finish. 4, actually, because 91, he was a Dodger by then. So, yeah, I think it definitely has to be Darryl. And again, like we said, we're not even naming anybody else who came close. So
I think it's your turn to pick, but to me, 19 was, I guess there was a little bit of competition, but 19 felt pretty close to a no-brainer.
Yeah, 19 is Willis Reed. The captain of those great Knicks teams. And Brian Trottier was a really good player on those 4 straight Cup Islander teams. And, perhaps there's a thing to say of like, well, Willis Reed's famous for winning. I mean, he won the 2, but he was the captain of the first Knicks team to ever win a championship. Was he the MVP of the league that year?
In 70, he was the MVP of the league. I think he was, and I'm maybe getting this wrong, but I don't think I am. I think this is the only guy ever to do this. He was MVP of the league, the NBA Finals, and the All-Star Game all in the same year.
Yeah, and then just on top of that, it was the most iconic moment in the history of the Knicks franchise that unless I missed something tonight in the first half of the game, but he's it's the most iconic moment in the history of the franchise, and certainly goes to certainly edges him out of anybody else, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree entirely. Number 20 is this was the first one where I was like, there's not any candidate that really, I guess maybe number 1 had a little bit of this, but like with all the other ones so far, I feel like we were choosing between legends. Number 20 was kind of like, geez, where do we go here? I had a little bit of an interesting idea, but well, I guess it is my turn. My initial instinct had been Allen Houston, but then I actually ended up going with Monty Irvin. Played for the New York Giants. He was a Negro League star, and then was one. I don't know if he was the first black New York Giant baseball player, but he was one of the first. He's in the Hall of Fame. He was on the 54 championship team and the 51 team with Bobby Thompson that won the pennant. Obviously in that famous last day. I guess sort of the no-brainer. Vaccaro in the Post picked Chris Mullen, but we're not doing college, so I mean, I guess sort of the obvious answer is Jorge Posada, and I don't know why, but for some reason I just was never a big Jorge Posada fan, and I don't know if I could articulate it well, but I just wasn't. So maybe I also felt some guilt about the fact that we didn't have Hubble, we didn't have Ott. So I don't know. I went with Monty Irvin, but I feel like you probably didn't. So
I went with Posada. He was on the team for 16 years. He was on the team from 95 to 2011. He won 5 championships with them. I understand what you're saying about, A, feeling bad about not having a lot of New York Giant representation, and B, that maybe Posada wasn't the sort of be all end all figure that maybe he got lumped in with some of those other guys. But I mean, we're really talking about a guy who played 7 years with the Giants and made one all-star team. Are we gonna put him over Jorge Posada? I don't know that I can get there.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. I would just like to point out to everybody that Andrew has now successfully advocated for 2 Yankee catchers. So good work.
Who else did I do besides
Munson?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's, I don't think any of us are arguing specifically for like teams from our.
No.
I mean, we've mostly root for the same teams anyway, but I'm not. And there wasn't one where I'm like trying to argue for a more marginal Nick over a Jet or anything like that. I try to play, I'd argue against 2 Giant quarterbacks in a row.
Yeah, you did. That's a good point. You really did. So I just want to point out, this is really cool. This might be the only time I've ever had this while we were recording. I have baseball reference, football reference, hockey reference, and basketball reference all open in different tabs on my computer, and I'm just typing these guys in and it goes. So just to give the audience a little bit of an idea, right now I have up Darryl Strawberry, Brian Trottier, Frank Gifford, and Earl Monroe, and I'm sure some of those will change as time goes on. We're on to number 21, and this is another one where I'm curious to see where you're going to go.
So this is another one where I thought I would end up arguing for Tiki Barber, to be honest. And Tiki Barber had some really great years, especially late in his career, but I ended up going with O'Neill. He was with the Yankees 9 seasons. He won 4 championships. He played in another World Series. 4-time All-Star with the Yankees. I know sometimes the whole, the Warrior thing got a little bit overdone, but I think I don't think Tiki Barber quite gets there to unseat a guy who was a core piece and made some of the most memorable plays on a team that won all those championships.
I went with an O'Neill too, and probably a little bit biased by the winning and also by the fact that, people liked Paul O'Neill and nobody seemed to like Tiki Barber. The other thing too is, let's not pretend that Tiki Barber was, a dominant rusher for the Giants for, the entirety of his career. He had some really good years, but I mean, how many years was he even a Pro Bowler? It's not like he was the
very end of his career.
Yeah, because Coughlin helped him fix his fumbling. He was a Pro Bowler 3 times, first team All-Pro. Yeah, hey, the guy had some amazing years. Last 5 years of his career, he rushed for 1,000 yards every single year. And led the league in yards from scrimmage. He was a good pass catcher, but yeah, I mean, guy wasn't even really a starter until 2000. So yeah, I go O'Neill. Especially kind of like you said, what his coming to the team meant as far as turning it around in the early 90s. So yeah, I'm with you on O'Neill.
All right, number 22.
Kind of in a similar place. I went with a guy who joining a team was kind of one of the last pieces towards winning a championship. I went with Dave DeBusschere. I know What?
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead. Nope. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I know that some people would argue for for Mike Bossy, who was 4 Stanley Cups and playoff MVP in 81, 82. I'm reading here in this post, and I think it's actually in The Athletic, his .76 goals per game is best all time. I feel like you might be about to argue for Bossy, and I don't know how hard I'm going to push back on that.
Yeah, Bossy was the best player on that Islanders dynasty.
Okay.
He was the playoff MVP in the 82 playoffs, rookie of the year in 1978. He's the best Islander player in franchise history. I think he has to be considered. Let me pull up one. I thought there was one more thing I wanted to mention about Bossy, but especially at the time of his retirement, where he stood in a lot of those records, I think it has to be Mike Bossy. Not to take anything away from Dave DeBusschere, but Bossy, average goals scored per regular season games, third highest all-time average points scored per regular season game, second of 5 players to score 50 in 50 games, tied the record for most 50-goal seasons with Wayne Gretzky and Alexander Ovechkin. His were consecutive. To me, it's Bossy.
Okay, I can give you that. I can give in there. I can give him Mike Bossy.
All right.
23.
So now, 23, I went with Mattingly.
Me too.
Mattingly had a very long career with the Yankees, and maybe towards the end was getting by a little on reputation after injuries taken hold. But he's 9 Gold Gloves, 84 AL batting champion, 85 MVP. Was really the big, the sort of face of the Yankees for a very long time now, not associated with the championship era, but they were still a good team for most of the time he was there. I think you have to give it to Mattingly. And the next, Bob Nystrom from those Islanders teams, but I just couldn't seriously consider anybody but Mattingly.
Yeah, same here. 24, I think, came out, for me at least, where I thought it would come out. Where did you go with 24?
So I ended up going with Mays. Initially, I thought about Bill Bradley.
Same here.
But, I feel like I'm running down some of these Knicks guys, and that's not my intention. Bill Bradley's career stats and everything are not as impressive when you look at them. He won the Rookie of the Year. His first year, he was Rookie of the Year in 67, 68.
I have to wonder how much of that Rookie of the Year was on reputation coming from Princeton with all the hype and everything.
Especially because he only played 45 games.
Yeah, exactly.
And then he was an all-star once in 1972-73. So an important part of Knick championship teams, to be sure, and a great player and associated with the Knicks golden age. But when you consider Willie Mays, and you can look and go, well, he was there in 51 and then he was gone for pretty much the entirety of 52 and 53. It's like, then he came back in 54 and made the greatest catch of all time and won a World Series. Did he win an MVP with the New York Giants?
54. He was MVP in 54.
Won an MVP. You could consider Darrelle Revis here. Actually more than Bill Bradley, I think.
Yeah.
Revis was a Jet from 07 to 12. He was first team All-Pro in 09, 10, and 11. Pro Bowler 4 times. Defense came in second in Defensive Player of the Year in 09. Actually, he was back with the Jets in 15 and 16, but not really at the same level. I'm still inclined to go with Mays because of the MVP and the championship. But Revis gets closer probably than you think.
He does. If he'd been a Jet his whole career, it's just so hard because how do you not give it to Willie Mays?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe we just need to just stick with Mays and not overthink it too much. But yeah, it's it's. I could understand how maybe we're copping out a little bit and going more based on reputation than on actual New York performance.
All right. Number 25, and this is an interesting one. I ended up going with Bill Melchione.
Me too.
From the Nets.
Me too.
The articles started pointing me towards Mark Teixeira, and I loved Mark Teixeira, and I'm not knocking him. And maybe some of it was me trying to Melchione had his number retired, and B, we don't have a net and probably aren't going to have too many opportunities to have a net on here. But I just, as I went, and I was like, I was more impressed with it just seemed like nobody else made a strong enough case to unseat him, I guess.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. Melchione never played for the Nets in the NBA, but just in the ABA with Dr. J, won some championships. Teixeira, was Teixeira ever even an all-star? He was an all-star in 09 the first year. He had he led the American League in home runs in Teixeira. He was second in MVP voting. Jeez. To Joe Mauer. And then after that, he did kind of he had some good home run years. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess it's closer than I thought it was with Teixeira, but I had originally gone Bill Melchione too, so I guess we'll just stick with that.
All right.
So what do you think? Why don't we go up through 33? We got about 15 minutes left to record, and we'll go up for 33. That'll get us a third of the way there.
All right, and we're going to get to an interesting section of this, at least for me. Number 26, who did you go with?
I went to hockey. I went to the Devils. I went with and I'm going to maybe mispronounce his name. I went with Patrick Elias, who was a two-time Cup winner with the Devils, played his whole career from 1995 all the way to 2016 with the Devils. Like I said, won 2 cups. Teams all, and this is as of 4 years ago, so maybe this has changed 5 years ago. But as of 2020, he was the all-time leader in points, goals, and assists for the Devils. I couldn't think of where else I would go. I want to see the articles. I don't think even really listed any other sort of. Okay, well, so Vaccaro mentioned he in 2020 named El Duque, but El Duque ain't anybody's all-time leader in anything other than maybe leg height while pitching. So,
yeah, I went with Elias as well. This article I have here, which is a little bit old, but it has him as the 3rd greatest Devil of all time. One of the guys in front of him was Scott Stevens, who somebody's out in my backyard going through cans. Elias was a mainstay of those teams. He came in right after they won that first cup, so he wasn't on the first team to win a cup, but he was a big part of the next 2. Nobody else really jumps out at you with this number, and those Devil teams tend to get a little bit underrated just in terms of the style they played, the fact that, even in the New York area, even when they were winning, they weren't like the biggest thing, but they were still so I think you would have to go with Elias here.
And what about 27? Because I actually had another Devil for 27.
So did I. Went with Scott Niedermayer.
Yeah, Hall of Fame.
That's why I said this is a little bit of an interesting part here.
Yeah, and it definitely feels like a little bit of a drop-off, even though, these guys are both Hall of Famers, Elias and Niedermayer. Yeah, Hall of Famer, 3 titles. He says he won a Norris Trophy. What is that for?
Oh, God. I would have to look that up. I'm sorry.
Give me a second here. I think it might be for the best defenseman. Top defenseman. Yeah. So, It's him. It's him. I saw Vaccaro mention Rodney Hampton. Give me a break. So
yeah, I looked it up, and there's no real argument to make that Niedermeyer shouldn't be above him. He was on all of those. He's an all-star really from 97 on. He was on all three of the Cup teams that won, and then the one that got there. Yeah, I think you got to go with Niedermeyer there. So a couple of Devils back to back.
28, I went with Curtis Martin.
Yeah, I went with Curtis Martin as well.
Best running back in Jet history.
Best running back in Jet history. Was on really the best Jet team since Super Bowl III in that 98 team. Huge part of the Parcells coming over from New England was bringing him 7 straight 1,000-yard seasons in 8 years with the Jets, 1,700 yards in 2004, towards the end of that streak, and just, really a workhorse on a lot of teams that outside of really 98 with Vinny Testaverde did not have great quarterback play, even though Pennington had his moments. So yeah, I think it's definitely Martin.
All right, wrapping up the 20s here. Where did you go for 29?
I went with Catfish Hunter.
Yeah, I did too.
I really didn't see much that jumped out at me, and I feel like Catfish Hunter's biggest sort of mark with the Yankees was just being sort of marking the beginning of the Steinbrenner era and the big free agencies. And I mean, he was only a Yankee, 5 years, 76 or 75 through 79. Was only an all-star. 75, he was really good. He was a runner-up for the Cy Young. 76, he was an all-star. And then, he was on the 2 teams that won championships. But
his career he was not very good with the Yankees outside of that first year. I mean, he's got a WAR of in his last 5 or 4 seasons with the Yankees, 76, 77, 78, 89. He's actually got a WAR of only 1.8. Yeah, he was 2-9 his last year with a 5.3 ERA. Yeah, to me, Catfish Hunter is kind of a marginal Hall of Famer. But he did, he did win a Cy Young. Guy won 5 World Series in the 1970s. So I couldn't think of where else to go. Obviously, basketball, you don't get a lot of guys number 29. And I couldn't think of anybody on the Jets, Mets, Giants, or in hockey that came anywhere close. So, yeah, Catfish Hunter.
Yep. And I looked to see if anybody jumped more out at me, and they really didn't, to be honest. All right, so now we're going to move into the 30s. Who did you have for number 30?
So I feel like we're kind of, we're really kind of beating the Devils to death here. But I did go with Brodeur, Martin Brodeur, who was he won 4 titles with the Devils?
I think 3.
Was it 3? Okay, they only won 3 in that time period.
I think 95, 2000, and 03, and then 01 they got there. I might have 2000 and 01 flipped, but...
the only other... people made an argument. I saw something about another goalie, about Henrik Lundqvist, but I am by no means an expert on goalies, but, Lundqvist was a good goalie, but Brodeur was a championship goalie and leads the league all time in wins by a goalie. At least he did as of 4 years ago, and I don't believe anybody's broken that record. I'll look that up real quick.
Well, let me give you this. So, and this will be he played about 7 games with the St. Louis Blues at the end of his career, but he is most wins in NHL history by a lot. By the way, games played. 3 Stanley Cup championships, 4 Vezina trophies, won at least 30 games, most saves, holds a record for most shutouts. He's got almost every goalie record. So I think you have to go with him as number 30. And Lundqvist was a really good player, but it's Martin Brodeur.
31 was really interesting to me.
Between Billy Smith and Mike Piazza?
Correct.
I went with Piazza just because I feel like, he's the highest profile Met really of the last however long. And I mean, Jacob deGrom might come up in later episodes. And, obviously they just signed Juan Soto, so we'll see. But I couldn't get, and I mean, Billy Smith obviously was the goalie for those teams, but I just couldn't get past considering Piazza as the guy here.
I had originally put Piazza, and then I put in Billy Smith. And again, I do not know much at all about these Islander teams, so I just want to throw that out there, right at the start. The one thing that did, obviously we talked about this in that we have a team that won 4 championships in a row, and we have definitely represented them pretty well so far. We've got Bossy, we've got Trottier. I thought we even had a third one, but maybe we didn't. Maybe we just had Bossy and Trottier. Oh no, not Trottier. I'm sorry,
Bossy and Gillies.
Bossy and Gillies. Yeah, so we've not neglected those Islander teams. Looking at it again, I think I might flip back to Piazza. I mean, Billy Smith. Now, is Billy Smith? He's in the Hall of Fame, but I don't know. Again, this is one of those positions where my lack of hockey knowledge maybe gets me a little bit because he's on the NHL 100th anniversary team. He's in the Hall of Fame, but it's according to this, he was only a one-time All-Star. But let me see here. Sometimes All-Star games, different places that you look in hockey, it tends to. Mm-hmm. So let me see awards and achievements. I'm not played in one All-Star game. Yeah, and who knows? Maybe hockey people that might be listening would tell us that doesn't mean anything. But yeah, it's close. But I can go Piazza because he was, probably. Maybe outside of Josh Gibson in the Negro Leagues, he was for a couple of years there, he was the biggest offensive force as a catcher in the history of baseball, putting up home runs as a 30-plus catcher, 40, 38, 36, 33, galvanized the team, brought him back into the playoffs, brought him to the World Series. So, yeah, I can go Piazza.
All right, so we got 2 more for tonight. Number 32, I went with Julius Erving from the New York Nets.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, who did they even? I mean, I'm sure they had other people listed, but to me, it seemed like Erving was pretty decisively the guy there.
So the 2 guys that
are Elston Howard listed.
The 2 guys at the Athletic list are Emerson Boozer, who was a running back for the Jets in the 60s. I feel like that kind of shows you like the nostalgia of some of these people writing this. Like, I feel like if Emerson Boozer had wore 32 for the Jets in either the 40s or the 80s, he probably wouldn't have been on there. But that 68 Jet team really engenders a lot of nostalgia. I get it with Elston Howard, first black Yankee, won the 63 MVP, but Dr. J with the Nets, let me just pull up that stat line. First of all, he was doing things when he was with the Nets that nobody had ever done in the history of professional basketball, the high flying, the dunks, all those types of things. And most people didn't see it because he was, the TV audiences and the TV availability for the ABA was not the best. If he doesn't join the ABA in the early 70s, the league probably doesn't last as long as it does. He wins 3 straight MVPs for the Nets, 3 straight ABA MVPs, 74, 75, 76. The last 3 years of the league, 2 ABA titles. I can't not take Julius Erving with the New York Nets.
I agree with that.
And let me just point out, I know he's a little young to listen, but I just want to point out to my son, Thomas, if you're ever listening to this, we have both Clyde Frazier and Dr. J on the team, and those are the two starting lineup figures that he's obsessed with. So Clyde Frazier, Dr. J, both on the team, Thomas.
Excellent. And then 33 is Patrick Ewing.
Yeah.
I didn't see anybody else that really bears any kind of serious consideration, and it would be tough to beat Ewing anyway. But 33 Patrick Ewing.
All right, so just give me a second here. I want to, since we got a couple minutes here, I just want to tally this up here. So we got, for Dodgers, we got Reese and we got Hodges. That's 2. We got 2 Nets, Melchioni and Irving. We got 2 Islanders, Gillies and Bossy. 1 New York Giant and Mays. We got 3 Devils, I want to say. Couple of Mets. I think 3 Mets also. So we really, with the exception of the fact that I think we both, a couple of Rangers too. We got, I guess Messier might be our only Ranger so far. Looking here, but let me just run through it here quick. Number 1, Pee Wee Reese. Number 2, Derek Jeter. Number 3, Babe Ruth. Number 4, Lou Gehrig. Number 5, Joe DiMaggio. Number 6, Joe Torre. Number 7, Mickey Mantle. Number 8, Yogi Berra. Number 9, Clark Gillies. Number 10, Clyde Frazier. Number 11, Mark Messier. Number 12, Joe Namath. Number 13, Alex Rodriguez. Number 14, Gil Hodges. Number 15, Thurman Munson. Number 16, Frank Gifford. 17, Keith Hernandez. 18, Darryl Strawberry. 19, Willis Reed. 20, Jorge Posada. 21, Paul O'Neill. 22, Mike Bossy. 23, Don Mattingly. 24, Willie Mays. 25, Bill Melchioni. 26, Patrick Elias. 27, Scott Niedermeyer. 28, Curtis Martin. 29, Catfish Hunter. 30, Martin Brodeur. 31, Mike Piazza. 32, Julius the Dr. Irving. And 33, Patrick Ewing. I feel like you can tell the story of the history of New York sports pretty well just through those 33 guys.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And, obviously we'll have another 30 to once you get above 60, you're mostly dealing with football, to be honest. Maybe even above 50.
Occasional hockey jumps in here and there, but
obviously 99 in baseball is going to be, is going to be a baseball at this point. But once we get into the 90s, you might see some weird special teamers and stuff. And that's why that'll be kind of a fun, different episode too. It might be excruciating to put together, but it'll be fun after that.
Yeah. And so, it does become a little bit of a slog when you get into the 60s and 70s because it's a lot of offensive and defensive linemen, basically.
Yep.
All right. Well, this was fun. We'll get this one out. I don't know when we'll do the next one. This will probably be something it's not going to be our next episode, but it'll be, it'll be something we sprinkle on. We got 2 more to do, and we'll sprinkle those in over the next several months. So, for all these legends, and for Andrew, I want to say thank you. And until next time, I'm Dan Newman.
And I'm Andrew Newman. Goodbye, old sports.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you got to do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.